Here we are continuing on with our civil rights movement, just notes and material that I'm covering for class. Now, this is going to be the intro to a pretty horrific murder, aka lynching in this case, and trial that really outrages a ton of people around the country. And most historians will look back and say that this was the one thing that kind of sparked and got the ball rolling on all of the civil rights movement and the protests that were right around the corner from it. It was months after this trial concluded that Martin Luther King organizes the first of the big civil rights protests, the Montgomery bus boycott, which we're going to be covering that in the very near future too. Now, today, I also explained in the first chunk of notes the Brown versus Board of Education decision. That was a kind of short 10-minute lecture, but I think that's kind of a good starting point for the civil rights movement because that decision really elevates the temperature. It gets everything close to a boiling point, and then this happens in the next year, this murder and trial, and that's kind of like the final straw, and a lot of people are just at their wits' end, and that kind of ignites everything and gets it going. So this video is some intro, a couple notes I'm giving you, and then I want you to watch the docudrama that I've also attached on where it gets way more in depth to the Emmett Till lynching and trial. I think, sometimes documentaries are a little bit dry and boring. This one isn't the highest resolution quality, but I think it's good enough that and there's enough good quality content there, and it's a super interesting story that I think it's worth your time to watch it. Now, because of the notes and the video that I have attached, ends up being like an hour and 20 minutes total. I'm dating this out, like everything will be due by Monday at the end of the day. But also I want to let you know and give you a heads up on it. We will have a quiz that ties into the Emmett Till lynching and trial that's going to come directly off of this chunk of notes, and it's going to come off of the video primarily. So make sure you watch those, but I'm dating it out till Monday. So you have all weekend to get it done. No excuses for not having the time to watch it. It's probably best just watch it today or wrap it up Monday in class, and then you'll be all ready to go and you should ace the quiz. So Emmett Till, he is a young black kid that was born in Chicago, Illinois. His dad died during World War II. I'm going to add a little bit more about that part of the story that's not covered in the documentary later on, probably next week. We'll revisit it. But no, he grew up with a single mom. His mom worked very hard, seems like a great lady. He's a pretty average kid. I believe he was in 8th grade, if I remember right, but 14 years old, roughly the age most of you are that are watching this video. Now, he was born in the North, and there's a lot of racial tensions up North for sure. It's not like at all like it is today, but they didn't have the policy of like separate but equal up here. There was no like schools often were segregated just because blacks and whites often didn't live in the same neighborhoods, but we didn't have that rigid policy of segregation like they had in the southern states. There weren't Jim Crow laws, remember? Jim Crow law is one that like it basically makes blacks second-tier citizens. There were thousands of them across the South, but they would discriminate against blacks for one reason or another and not give them the same rights as what the white community would have. So he grows up in the northern part of the country where there is a lot of racial tension, but it's not as rigid. It's not the same as it was in the deep South. Well, he goes down to visit family in Money, Mississippi. Okay, Mississippi has often had the reputation, especially back in this era, being like the most southern state. Like it is in the beginning of the video, they say it's the most southern place on earth, which it's not Antarctica. It's not the most southern, but the metaphor is that it is of all of the southern former Confederate states, Mississippi is often regarded as like kind of the most backward one, the one that is like the most traditional and conservative, and the one that had the most rigid segregation. So Emmett Till goes down to visit family. His uncle specifically, his uncle Moses was basically a sharecropper. He worked on some different white-owned farms, would pick cotton and other crops. That was kind of how he made his living. And he's visiting his cousins and stuff. And he's used to being up in Chicago. Well, he and his cousins, they were going down there. They were working. He was staying for most of the summer. One day after like working out in the fields and being hot and miserable, they go to a local party store, and while they're hanging out there, I believe they were playing checkers or cards or something. He ends up going into a store. Nobody 100% knows exactly what went down there, but essentially he likely, although there are conflicting accounts to this, he kind of whistled or said, "Hey, baby," or something like that to the white woman that was running the cashier, and everything goes bad from there. Now, if you were Emmett Till and you lived up in Chicago and did something like that, might be seen as disrespectful. Maybe you might even get cussed out or yelled at, maybe even get slapped or get a punch or something. But Mississippi is a whole different world from what it would have been like up in Michigan or Chicago or any of these bigger northern cities. Down there, you didn't do that. They were so rigidly segregated that blacks and whites just were not supposed to mix. And we've talked about this a little bit before, but lynchings, I covered it back, I think, in quarter one or quarter two. A lynching, it's a very important key word that I'd want you to have in your notes. It's a form of violence where a group, or it's a mob, often mob mentality. In the case of Emmett Till, it was two guys that did it, but a lot of times it's a big group, will administer justice, I put in there, because it's justice in their eyes, although often it's not justice at all, through the execution, torture, murder, just horrific mob violence where it's kind of like they're going to go target somebody, pull them out of their bed at night, torture them, beat them, eventually murder them. And it's all done without a trial. Okay. So that's what a lynching is. Now, lynchings can happen to people of other races. You can find incidents where there were quite a few white guys down south that got lynched for one reason or another. But in American history, most people that were lynched, it generally was happening in the southern states, and for sure, overwhelmingly, the most lynching victims are black men. Also, what is the most common thing that a black man would get lynched for? Because it could happen for a variety of reasons. And like I said, even there are many accounts of white guys that got out of line and did something wrong, and ended up getting lynched. Like guys around the town said, "We're not putting up with that," and they go track them down, and that was the end of them. But most of the black guys that got lynched in the southern states, the most common reason was that they were seen as doing something inappropriate or associating with white women. Okay. That was very taboo. I mean, not only did kids not go to the same schools and mix racially, but man, it was seen as majorly taboo to have a relationship with a black guy and a white woman. Just didn't happen down south. And if you did, you're putting a big target on your back. Even if you didn't actually have a relationship together, if people just thought you did, that could get you lynched. That could get you murdered. Okay. Now, up north, probably honestly in Michigan or New York or Chicago, it was still pretty taboo back at this time to have interracial marriages or couples. But you're not probably going to get lynched over it. Down south, it's a whole different world. So anyway, I want you to know that this whole trial, for good reason, or the murder and then the trial that follows, attracts national and world attention because it's a super outrageous thing that happens. I mean, it should make your blood boil when you watch this. And there's also some very graphic scenes that you'll see in the documentary, but I think it's really important that you cover history accurately. You don't want to whitewash things and make it seem like, it didn't happen. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, America is a great country. I think we have a lot of great founding principles and ideas. I think also there are many times in American history where we have not lived up to those ideals and those founding principles, or those founding principles and ideals didn't apply to certain groups of people. It's important that we are honest about that stuff because that'll help make a better future moving forward. So this is a really important case that you should learn about. Everybody, I think, should know about this. Not only just because of how outrageous it was and the horrible thing that happened to Emmett Till. I mean, that alone is worth studying, but also because of the cultural and historic implications and repercussions from what happened here, this really ignites everything. And months later is when Rosa Parks is going to refuse to give up her seat on the bus. Okay. It wasn't directly related to this, but I think that a lot of the blacks down south were fed up, and then they saw this happen and they just had enough. And then that's when Martin Luther King comes in and kind of rallies around Rosa Parks, and he starts the very first of many civil rights protests that we're going to cover that unfold over the next decade. So I hope you enjoy the video. I hope you find it engaging, enlightening, and it really is something that impacts you. If you have any questions about any of this stuff, give me a holler. You'd want to have these things in your notes. You want to watch the video pretty close, and then all of that is going to correspond to the quiz that we'll do on it Monday. Take care.